Not safe for work. What is the best not safe for work historical fact you know? Please consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. Felix Faure, French president from 1895 to 1899, died of a seizure while getting a blowjob. The painter John Ruskin supposedly broke up with his wife after seeing her naked because he was too disgusted to consummate the marriage. She then married another artist. It's believed that this is most likely because she had pubic hair, and he didn't realize that was normal because he had only seen nude classical statues and children. The inventor of the modern bra had a dog named Clitoris. The oldest known objects that were probably sex toys were made out of stone and animal dung, 30,000 years ago. The oldest known objects that were definitely sex toys were anatomically shaped jade and bronze dildo/butt plugs dating back 2000-3000 years. King Edward VII of England had an elaborate sex chair. Fath Ali Shah Qajar, second king in Qajar dynasty in Iran, about 200 years ago, had 160 wives. Nasiruddin Shah Qajar had about 50. In Islam, you're not allowed to marry more than 4 wives at the same time. It is said that Nasiruddin Shah was once walking in his palace and saw a beautiful girl and asked if he could marry her. Everyone was looking at him weirdly and he asked why. One of his servants said that she was his daughter. The ancient city of Alexandria had one of the most famous red light districts brothels in the world. Once the prostitutes went on a strike and the economy of the city was at risk. So Cleopatra consulted one of the wise men in the library, and he suggested that they build another district as a competitor. Then they had 2 districts and the prostitutes of the first district had to end their strike. Mary Shelley lost her virginity on her mother's grave. Charles II, Charles the Impotent, was the convergence point for several generations of royal inbreeding and was born with significant disabilities. His parents were desperate for him to produce an heir. They implemented a system of ropes and pulleys to lower virgins onto him in hopes he could impregnate one. It didn't work and the dynasty collapsed. Ottoman Padishah Selim II died by stepping on a soap and falling while chasing girls in his harem. Pretty sure Salvador Dali took imprints of a lot of people's asshole folds and made the shocking discovery that each and every butthole fold that exists is unique in its foldiness. In ancient Greece, prostitutes used to press "follow me" into their sandals so that when they walked it would imprint into the dirt or sand. So when people saw it they'd know that they could follow the trail and it would end in a prostitute and maybe some sex. There's a school life pro tip where I love called the slipper slapper that shows Aphrodite and Pan. And she is. Edit. My bad, this is not true. Holding a sandal with "follow me" on the bottom. Big edit. Sorry, I appear to have misunderstood a professor and then didn't follow up before posting. The slipper slapper is a beautiful school life pro tip here, but does not have "follow me" studded on the bottom in Greek. My bad for not researching the statue more before posting. George Washington, in his youth, was a handsome, strapping young man that all the women and officers' wives wanted to screw. Our founding father was a bit of a poonhound. Not safe for work. But Mozart has a piece of music called "Lick My Arse." The Pompeii graffiti. It's full of your mom jokes. XY here, and I shit here. Some of my favorites. Theophilus. Don't perform oral sex on girls against the city wall like a dog. I screwed the barmaid. A Timidus got me pregnant. Secundus likes to screw boys. I screwed a lot of girls here. Just goes to show you that this kind of humor is universal. The first thing the father of microbiology, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, put under a microscope was semen. They understood that semen was integral to the creation of life but didn't yet understand the concept of single-cell organisms. Benjamin Franklin enjoyed older women, so much so he endorsed getting one as his mistress, giving reasons such as they can't have children and that the sex was just as good, if not better, than courting a young woman. Sample of a letter James Joyce wrote his wife. "My sweet little Horatio, I did as you told me, you dirty little girl, and pulled myself off twice when I read your letter. I am delighted to see that you do like being fricked arseways. Yes, now I can remember that night when I fricked you for so long backwards. It was the dirtiest fricking I ever gave you. Darling, European women of the 17th century would bare one or both breasts as a sign of a virtue. They often used wet nurses in order to preserve their breasts for public display." Nicholas Machiavelli, author of The Prince, gave this description of a prostitute who was reportedly so ugly he threw up on her. What the hell? Luigi, you can see what fortune can do to men. You had just finished fricking your woman when you want another one. I've been in Medina for several days when I came across an old woman who washes my shirts. She asked me to come into her hovel because she wished to show me some fine shirts. Innocent prick that I am, I went in. There was a woman over in the corner. "This is the shirt that I wanted to sell you." The hag said. I was terrified, but I fricked her. I found her thighs flabby and her cunt damp. Her breath stank, but I was horny. When I was finished I took a torch and looked at her. I nearly dropped dead. The woman was ugly. She had a tuft of hair on her head, but her head was bald. Her forehead was scarred. One eye looked up, the other down. Her eyes were filled with mucus, and she had no eyebrows. Her nose was twisted into a funny shape. Her mouth looked like Lorenzo de Medici's but was bent to one side. She was toothless and saliva drooled out of her mouth. Her upper lip had a mustache. I looked at her stupefied. "What's the matter, sir?" she asked me. As soon as she opened her mouth, such a stench came out that my eyes and my nose were assaulted and my stomach indignant. They could not bear it, and I vomited all over her. When Victor Hugo died, all the prostitutes in Paris took a holiday to mourn him. They all got to know him pretty well, if you know what I mean. 18th century Empress of Russia Catherine the Great employed foot ticklers to turn her on. St. Lawrence was martyred on a gridiron. His last words were, "I'm well done on this side. Turn me over." He's now the patron saint of cooks and comedians. I'm not making any of this up. Hitler had the hots for his niece Jelly Roggel, 23 years old, who was found dead in her bedroom after she shot herself in the chest with his own gun, noting the fact that she lived with him until 1931. There are a lot of controversial aspects to that story, but also a lot of interesting pieces of information. Some historians speculate that they had a bizarre relationship and that, probably, she was the love of his life. He mourned her death for a week locked in her bedroom, denied food and wanted to kill himself. After that he kept her room as a shrine and kept her memories with him until near his death. A merkin is a replacement wig for pubic hairs prostitutes used to use after they shaved theirs due to pubic lice. Pedicabo ego vas mabo, a classic line of Latin poetry, and the first thing I say when people ask me to say something in Latin. It means I'll sodomize and face frick you. It was written by the famous poet Catullus, who also did the whole Million Kisses poem everyone needs to translate in Latin class. Roman Emperor Commodus had an harem of 300 women and men and spent most of his time there. Best? I would not call this best, but it certainly stuck with me since I learned it in class. In ancient Greece it was believed that if a girl doesn't lose her virginity by her first period, she would fill up with blood to the point where her eyes would turn red, and she would hear voices telling her to jump into wells. Or, at least, it was written in one Greek doctor's writings. There's no real evidence how widely it was believed. Not so much as historically as biblical. According to the Bible, right when Jesus is getting arrested by the Romans, a random and named naked guy just runs past everyone. He is never mentioned again, and it is unknown why they even put in the Bible. It's Mark 14:51-52 if you want to check it out. Belarus, World War II. A high-ranking Nazi officer had a brothel/concubine set up. Obviously, not consensual. Well, some of the ladies didn't like the situation, and didn't like Nazis, so they put a landmine under his mattress. I call it the Belarusian space program. Lyndon Johnson supposedly got a Secret Service man to stand in front because he had to pee and be shielded from view. Lyndon Johnson purposefully peed on the Secret Service man's leg knowing full and well he wouldn't budge. Mathematician Kurt Gödel suffered from mental illness and was paranoid he was going to be poisoned. He would only eat food his wife had prepared for him. In 1977, she was hospitalized for 6 months and could no longer prepare his food. In her absence, he refused to eat and eventually starved to death. He only weighed 65 pounds when he died. The first vibrating dildo was diesel-powered. My understanding is that most common folk throughout much of history had very meager lodgings, and most families would sleep together both for warmth as well as the simple fact that they didn't have the space for people to sleep separately. If mom and dad were in the mood to procreate, the rest of the family was just there. In 1820 Scotland, medical cadavers were in such high demand and worth so much money that two men, William Burke and William Hare, went into business together murdering people and selling the bodies to local universities. By the time their scheme was uncovered, 16 people had been killed. In the war for Texas independence against Mexico, after the Battle of the Alamo, there was this Mexican woman who was a spy for Texas. Nicknamed the Yellow Rose of Texas, she went and seduced the Mexican General Santa Anna. And while they were hooking up, the Texans did a surprise attack and slaughtered many Mexicans and won the war. Probably got some facts wrong, lol. King Edward II of England was apparently tortured before death, which included shoving a red-hot poker up his bum to burn his insides out. Whilst alive, there does remain some debate about this, but I was taught this in school. William the Conqueror allegedly smashed his testicles on the pommel of his horse's saddle, which eventually killed him, but that's not the end of it. During his funeral ceremony, they had placed him in a stone coffin/sarcophagus thing. It was unusually hot that day and his body swelled. Well, the coffin did not. So during his funeral, where he died by smashing his nuts, his body exploded. Don't know if it's true, but my history teacher told me about this one prostitute that got out of dying or something by showing the judges her boobs, claiming it would be against gods to destroy something so beautiful. While receiving oral sex in hot tubs, JFK would hold women's heads underwater during climax. His back pains were so severe Secret Service helped him out of the tub. In 2017, Oscar Wilde was among an estimated 50,000 men who were pardoned for homosexual acts that were no longer considered offenses under the Policing and Crime Act 2017. The act is known informally as the Alan Turing Law. Not that it matters to Mr. Wilde now, but 130 years is a long time to wait to have your name cleared. We can trace the path the Lewis and Clark expedition took by the mercury in the ground from their latrines. Why is there mercury? It was a syphilis treatment. They needed it due to their men freaking everything they could, like the wives and daughters of the natives they encountered. The one about Gandhi regularly group bathing, group sleeping/cuddling, and getting strip teases and lap dances from really young women, one of which was his grand or great-grand, I can't recall, nice, to test his sexual restraint or whatever. LOL. Elagabalus is my favorite, super young Roman emperor who also was a transsexual prostitute. From Wiki, Cassius Dio reported that Elagabalus would paint his eyes, depilate his body hair and wear wigs before prostituting himself in taverns, brothels, and even in the imperial palace. Finally, he set aside a room in the palace and there committed his indecencies, always standing nude at the door of the room, as the harlots do, and shaking the curtain which hung from gold rings. While in a soft and melting voice he solicited the passers-by. There were, of course, men who had been specially instructed to play their part. 4. As in other matters, so in this business, too, he had numerous agents who sought out those who could best please him by their foulness. He would collect money from his patrons and give himself airs over his gains. He would also dispute with his associates in this shameful occupation, claiming that he had more lovers than they and took in more money. Murdered at 18 by his own guards and thrown in the sewer. Then they went so far as to remove his name from all temples and remove all traces of him from society. Hitler's left nut was there, but it was smaller than the right one. Carperforce, a Roman gladiator, trained giraffes and other animals to rape women to entertain the Colosseum crowds. An octopus will tear its own cock off only to launch it at a female octopus, and the female will perform a sex act with the severed member. Jean-Paul Marat refused to refer to Marie Antoinette by her name in any of his publications. Instead, he simply referred to her as, quote, that Austrian whore. I remember reading something like Hans Christian Andersen kept a masturbation diary, often visited prostitutes just to chat, after which he masturbated and then wrote about it. Was possibly bi, and likely died a virgin. I want to say that there is a theory or something that The Little Mermaid was inspired by a man that HCA loved, but who didn't love him. Not entirely not safe for work or sourced, but you know. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a letter to a friend of his detailing how he fricked an ugly old woman after she washed his clothes. Mongols used to frick their horses. They liked it so much they even commissioned paintings about it. Elizabeth Bathory was a countess who lived in the Carpathian Mountains. She was one of the inspirations of Dracula and her nickname was Countess Dracula. She was possibly the most prolific serial killer in history. She believed that blood on her skin made her fresher and younger. She was responsible for the killing of 650 girls. Many were tortured for weeks and were often naked when they were tortured. They were forced to eat their own flesh. She sometimes drank the blood of the girls and stabbed them with needles. Some had their face, hands and private parts burned and bit their flesh and private parts. Many of them starved to death. Others were burned or froze to death naked. She might have eaten some of her servants. It is possible that she bathed in blood. She was never put on trial, but was forced to stay in one room for the rest of her life. She died 4 years later. Before Christian missionaries converted them to Christianity, the following was true in the native culture of Papua New Guinea. It was believed that the essence of manliness or machismo was contained in a man's semen. Therefore, young boys who were about to go through puberty were encouraged to swallow as much of it as possible. And they did. Hey, it was part of their culture. Who are you to judge? / Masturbation was once a prescribed form of relief for female schizophrenia. Please subscribe if you liked the video. It really helps the channel to grow. See you again.